Good afternoon, class. Today we'll look at Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is entitled Crime and Criminology. In this particular chapter, we'll just kind of start with the basics. This is where we will define criminology. We'll look at what criminologists actually do. We'll also look at the three major views that most criminologists use when they actually view crime. Let's go ahead and get started. First of all, we want to actually define what criminology is. And criminology can be defined as the scientific approach to studying criminal behavior. Okay. There are a number of important areas of interest that we could look at or focus on whenever we are studying criminal behavior. So we'll look at things. For one, we'll look at something like crime and looking at it as a social phenomenon. We'll look at the processes of making laws. We could also focus on the breaking of laws and how people actually react towards individuals who break the laws. And then we can look at how we're going to develop some principles as well. Now, when we look at criminology, there's going to be a distinct difference between criminology and criminal justice. Okay, you guys all probably know what criminal justice is, but you might not be as familiar with criminology. So there are some distinct differences between the two. First of all, when we're looking at criminology, one distinct difference is criminology attempts to try and explain the origins of crime. So why people actually engage in criminal behavior. The second thing is it explains the extent and the nature of crime in society. Okay, so those are the two distinct differences or the distinct things that occur for criminology. When we're talking about criminal justice, this is going to be the study of the agencies of social control. When we talk about the agencies of social control, there are a number of different agencies of social control. However, the three major components are going to be police, courts, as well as corrections. Okay, you should have learned that in your intro class. Now, when we're talking about criminology, your textbook also focuses on the sociology of deviance. Okay, so we're focusing on deviant behavior. Deviant behavior is a behavior that could also be considered a crime or it could not be considered a crime. Okay, so when we talk about deviant behavior, this is going to be any type of behavior that departs from the social norms, any type of behavior that departs from values or beliefs, but it does not necessarily mean that it is a criminal behavior. Okay, so something can be deviant but not necessarily be criminal. Okay, now when we're focusing on the definition of crime, crime is an act that's been deemed socially harmful. Sometimes it may be deemed socially dangerous. Okay, and there is a specifically defined prohibited is specifically defined and is prohibited. And there is a punishment under criminal law. So if you have an act that's missing one of those components, let's say it's an act that's socially harmful, but there are no penalties for criminal law, then it's not considered to be a crime. Recently, for example, some states have recently put in, I say recently, I mean the last few years or so, maybe 5 or 6 years, put in for individuals not to be able to leave their children at home at a certain age, under a certain age, home alone without an adult. Okay. Prior to that, individuals might have thought, to leave a 10-year-old at home was considered to be deviant, but it wasn't necessarily a crime. What made it a crime is it is specifically defined. So we said we give a specific definition. If you do this specific behavior, this behavior is prohibited, and therefore there is a punishment that goes along with it. Then it is considered to be a crime. Okay. So what exactly do criminologists do? Has anyone ever thought about being a criminologist? Well, criminologists devote a lot of time towards studying crime itself, not only studying crime itself, but also studying criminal behavior. Now, who would be a part of being a criminologist? There are a number of individuals that could be a criminologist. Criminologists come from very, very diverse fields, right? Just to that way we have a broad spectrum of individuals actually working together. So you may have somebody who studies law, you may have someone who studies who is a social worker, you may have someone who studies criminal justice, you may have someone who studies penology or works in penology. There are a number of different areas in which individuals could be a part of and still be a criminologist. Now, other things that criminologists, what do they actually do more in depth? They get criminal statistics. They also attempt to try and measure crime. They devise accurate methods of collecting crime data. They measure the amount of trends of criminal activity. They also try and determine who commits crime and where. So are we having more crime that occurs in a particular area? Do we have more males that commit these crimes? Do we have more females that commit these crimes? Is more crime occurring in the northern region as opposed to the southern region? There are a number of different areas in which criminologists actually look at. They also measure the effects of social policy, as well as looking at the trends and how they actually affect the crime rates. And then the last thing that they focus on is they try and attempt to design crime prevention programs. And not only just design crime prevention programs, but they also want to look at their effectiveness, right? Whether or not these programs are actually working, okay? Um, your textbook talks about socio-legal studies. They talk about the role that social forces play in shaping criminal law. So they talk about one thing in particular. They talk about the history of legal thought. They also talk about how social forces shape the definition and the content of law. They look at the impact of legal change on society. So how is society impacted by the legal changes that occur? The relationship that one has between law and social control, as well as the effects of criminalization and legalization on certain behaviors. Okay. Now, when we're talking about criminologists, they do a lot of theory, construction, and testing, right? So what exactly does that mean? That means in this class, the bulk of our class, I'll say 90% of our class, we're going to focus on theories, right? All of these, all of these different theories that criminologists have actually come up with. So this will probably be one of two chapters that won't cover too much theory, if any at all. The rest of our chapters will be strictly theory. So we talk about theory, that we have to define it. And so how we would define it is it's going to be interrelated statements or principles that explain some aspect of social life, right? So it might be some interrelated statements or principles that explain why crime actually occurs, right? Someone is going to say possibly poverty. Someone else is going to say lack of education. Someone else is going to say parenting skills, right? But the thing about having your own theory is the criminologists actually sit down and assess. They come up with the hypothesis and they assess their hypothesis. And how do they assess their hypothesis? They assess it by using empirical research. Okay. Now the rest of us who are not real criminologists, we just walk around and say, I think lack of education plays a significant role, but we don't have any empirical research in order to back that up. We're just basically talking, right? So yeah. Also, criminologists look at criminal behavior systems as well as crime typologies. So what exactly does that mean? That means that they do a lot of research on the specific types of criminals, okay? Or they look at, and they also look at the patterns of criminals, right? They look at whether or not individuals are engaging in a violent crime, perhaps they're engaged in public order crime, or either organized crime, something like that. So there are certain typologies for criminals. If you guys have ever looked at any type of huge or big stories when they're trying to locate, let's say, you see this a lot when you have like serial killers, right? Um, they'll do a lot of research, and the criminologist will be able to come in and tell you this individual is probably a loner. This individual probably have relationship problems. This individual probably doesn't work, or if they work in odd jobs, right? That's because they're looking at the typology. They're also focusing on the criminal behavior, right? And so they've done some studying, and so based off of that, they can say this is the type of individual that we're most likely looking for. Now, are they 100% accurate? Absolutely not. But they come pretty close to being able to pinpoint an individual that's engaging in criminal behavior. Okay. Criminologists are also involved in creating effective crime policies. We had a class last semester where we talked about policies, and we know how critically important policies are. And so they are also a part of policy making as well. They also help to develop methods of social control for those individuals who are working in the area, or working with individuals who are considered to be criminals. And they also look at the corrections and the control of known criminal offenders, right? Now, we talked about the idea that they make policies, they make programs, that they're studying criminal behavior, they're looking at typologies, but they also study victimology, right? This is basically the study of victims as well as their victimization. What exactly does that mean? How do we study victims and their victimization? Well, we can measure the nature and the extent of the criminal victimization, right? They also calculate the cost of a victim. So sometimes you'll see, if a woman is raped, that may cost her, or that may cost on average $1,100, right? Or they might say $2,500, right? Where do they get this information from? So they're calculating the cost of the time individuals may spend going to court, the time that individuals may lose when they go to work, the time and that when I say going to work, the time that they're actually going to court, they're missing work, the time that individuals might not want to go to work because they are having some type of emotional issues, the money that's actually spent for them to seek counseling. All of those different things is going to be a calculated cost for victimization. And then as they go through the criminal justice system, all those individuals that have to be paid, all right, that all calculates in the cost of victimization. They also look at what are the factors that increase the likelihood of an individual becoming a victim, right? We know that there are certain things and there are certain people who are more likely to be victims, right? And so criminologists actually focus and study that as well. They also look at the victim's role in precipitating crime. And we say the victim's role in precipitating crime, what are we saying? We're basically saying, how is it that the victim may have contributed in some type of way to their own victimization, right? There are some things that we could do that can contribute to our own victimization, right? And you say, how are you going to blame a victim for basically being a victim? Well, if Ms. Wharton is a drug dealer or a prostitute, then I am somehow in my area of drug dealing or prostituting, I could be making myself more likely to be a target, right? Because of my nightlife and I'm working as a prostitute, I have to be out late at night, perhaps. Okay. I may be dressed very scantily. So that, lichens are not lichens, but it would increase the chances that something could happen to me. Okay. Not saying that it would, it just, more likely than not, as opposed to someone who is going to church or already at home, this individual is more likely to be a victim. Criminologists also help to design services for victims as well, victims of crime. Okay. So let's take a look at the three major ways in which criminologists actually view crime. And this is going to go along with your first assignment that's actually due or will be due. So normally criminologists can view crime in a number of different ways. There are three major ways. One is going to be the consensus view. One is going to be known as the conflict view. And the third view is known as the interactionist view, right? So I want you to look at all three of these views and you actually become a criminologist and tell me why you view crime in the manner in which you view it. So let me tell you about the three. The first one is going to be the consensus view. According to the consensus view, it says crimes are behaviors that are believed to be repugnant to all elements of society and causes social harm. Well, first of all, we have to look at what does consensus mean. Consensus means the majority. So what does that mean? They're saying that what the majority of individuals deem to be socially harmful, those are the things that should actually be outlawed, right? That's how they actually view crime. When we're looking at the conflict view, the conflict view depicts society as a collection of diverse groups. And they said that these diverse groups are in constant and continuing conflict. Okay. So you have individuals who are from all spectrums of society. You have some rich people, poor people, you have people from different ethnic backgrounds, right? And all these individuals are basically fighting, right? Let's say when they mean conflict, they're having conflict on what they think should be outlawed, right? So you have the rich people who saying, we need to focus on these street crimes, right? And then you have poor people saying, you can focus on the street crimes all you want, but the real crime is going to be the white collar crime. Like the street crimes, okay, so I got $50, I got $150. But the organized crime or the white collar crime, they getting $15.5 million. That's what we need to be focused on. Don't focus on us little people, right? And so there's a conflict as to what should actually be outlawed. And then the third thing is the interactionist view. The interactionist view just basically says that people, institutions, and events are viewed subjectively, and they are labeled either as good or as bad according to the interpretation of the evaluator, right? So basically, you can kind of look at this almost kind of like the labeling theory, right? Individuals will look at certain crimes and decide whether or not this is good or this is bad, and that's going to be on an individual basis, right? So that's the three views of how criminologists actually view crime. Remember, it is consensus, it's conflict, and it is the interactionist view. All right, you guys, I'm going to stop here and we will pick up on Tuesday when we return to class. Should anyone have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or to reach out to me.